So you want to find out about ToK Exhibition Prompt number 33, how current knowledge is shaped by its historical development? Welcome to ToK Today. I'm Daniel. Please remember to hit like and subscribe to support the channel, support me, and develop your ToK thinking. Okay, to answer this prompt, we must consider the various ways in which we can describe or characterize the historical development of knowledge. This term is not solely confined to AOK history, but applies equally to all areas of knowledge. Current knowledge in all areas of knowledge has a period of historical development. So let's have a think about a few of the different ways that we could describe the historical development of knowledge. So I'm thinking that we could describe the historical development of knowledge as including periods of debate or contest, periods of integration or increasing cohesion, periods of upheaval, periods of denial, periods of unqualified acceptance, periods of qualified acceptance, periods of lapse, suppressed or oppressed knowledge, periods of thesis, periods of antithesis, and periods of synthesis. We could go on identifying different ways to describe the historical development of knowledge. There are so many different ways that you can do this. In short, I'm going to take periods of evolution, periods of revolution, and periods of synthesis as the historical development of knowledge that I'm going to consider for ToK Exhibition Prompt number 33. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to use those descriptions. You're free to use any descriptions that you want. Now, this prompt lends itself particularly well to the ToK optional themes. You know, those themes like knowledge and technology, knowledge and language, knowledge and politics, knowledge and religion. Because most of those themes are actually concerned, all of those themes, are actually concerned with the question, how is current knowledge shaped before it becomes current? So feel free to build your exhibition around a theme if that's your thing. Of course, there's no requirement from IB to build your exhibition around a theme. IB just say it could be helpful. But in some circumstances, it can also be limiting. So it's up to you. Now let's have a talk about choosing objects and developing knowledge arguments. IB recommend that you find objects from which knowledge arguments will just arise. So I'll just get some help with this bit. This is Bungle. So, for example, we could look at Bungle and I could say, oh, wow, Bungle demonstrates how current knowledge is shaped by the nature of truth in its historical development. So, if this process works for you, then feel free to look around your world and find 3 objects in which ToK is manifestly arising from. However, if you're anything like me and most of the students that I've taught, you may find it a little difficult to just magically see ToK manifest itself in the world around you. And if this is you, then you may want to use the little shortcut that I recommend my students use. And this shortcut is to write 3 distinct perspectives or knowledge arguments, 1 knowledge argument or perspective for each object, and then to find specific objects that demonstrate those perspectives or knowledge arguments. I call this the knowledge before objects process or method or way of doing it. Now let's just have a quick talk about specificity, a word I find difficult to say, specificity. If you want to get 5 or more marks out of 10 in the ToK exhibition, the higher marks, then you need to explain how each object makes a specific contribution to the exhibition. Now, this contribution has to be different to the contributions made by the other 2 objects. And this means that not only does your object have to be highly specific rather than generic, but it also has to demonstrate a specific perspective or knowledge argument. Now, let's just have a quick talk about what makes an object specific rather than generic. Okay, well, here's a pencil. And at this point, it's a generic pencil. There are billions of pencils in the world. Any other pencil could be swapped out for this pencil. However, if I told you that this was the pencil that Martin Luther used to write his 95 theses that led to the start of the Protestant Reformation in Wittenberg in 1517, then this is no longer a generic pencil, but it's a very specific pencil. Of course, ideally, we want to link that specificity to the knowledge arguments, and we'll get onto that later. Now, some people think that the objects have to be personal. They don't. They don't have to be personal. They have to be specific. Using personal objects is just an easy way of making them specific objects. But just because they're personal, it doesn't mean that they make a knowledge argument. If we go back to our pencil here, this pencil's owned by Martin Luther in 1517, therefore it's not specific to me. I mean, it's not really owned by Martin Luther in 1517, it's really owned by me, but I'm using it as an example, and I think you get the idea. Let's move on. Okay, let's look at writing 3 perspectives on knowledge arguments. If you look at the ToK Exhibition marking criteria, as I mentioned earlier, to get 5 to 10 marks, which is what you want to get, you're going to need to justify the inclusion of each object in the exhibition. So if we want to get high marks in the exhibition, we need to focus on the justification for the inclusion of the object. What does that mean? Well, let's have a look at the ToK subject report from May 2023, because that gives us some definition of what IB mean by justification. And it says, it is helpful for students to see the justification as following on from the links. That's there you say, this object is linked to this prompt in this way. Links are successfully made when they clearly explain the connection between the object and the knowledge question in the prompt. The justification provides further elaboration of that connection by showing what it is about that specific object that is so interesting in making us think about the prompt. So, in other words, justification is a link to the prompt that is specific to each object, so it's more original than the original link, and it's more linky than the original link. It's specific to the object, it links the object to the prompt, and it does it a bit more than the original link made earlier. So I thought long and hard about how to explain this justification to my students, and the most straightforward way that I've come up with is to ask them to write 3 perspectives or knowledge arguments on the prompt. That's 3 different ways of answering the prompt. One perspective or one way of answering the prompt for each object. Now, I call this the 3 knowledge arguments, and here are the 3 knowledge arguments that I've written for prompt 33. So if you remember, prompt 33 is, how is current knowledge shaped by its historical development? So knowledge argument or perspective 1 is, current knowledge can be shaped by evolution in its historical development. And perspective 2 or knowledge argument 2 is, current knowledge can be shaped by a revolution in its historical development. And knowledge argument 3 is, current knowledge can be shaped by synthesis in its historical development. Synthesis, another word I find difficult to say, but I like the idea. Now you'll see that I've used the words from the prompt in my knowledge arguments, and this helps to maintain focus on the prompt. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each knowledge argument and identify an object and explain the link of the object and the knowledge argument to the prompt, sort of like doing the ToK exhibition commentary. Now remember, this is only one way of doing the commentary, and I have in the notes for this video, I've got more ways of doing the commentary, and you can pick up an ebook about this prompt, and you can pick up an ebook about all of the prompts. Please remember to hit like and subscribe if you're getting value from this video. Okay, let's get into it. So, object number 1 is my vaccine certificate from when I got an mRNA vaccine in Thailand in 2021. So remember, I'm using this object for the knowledge argument that current knowledge can be shaped by evolution in its historical development. The link to the prompt is that our current knowledge of vaccines has enabled virologists to develop vaccines using messenger RNA, mRNA. The historical development of knowledge regarding viruses, the human immune system and immunology has gone through processes of refinement that have culminated in the mRNA vaccine. And at each stage of the historical development, some knowledge has been selected for further development, whilst other knowledge has been discarded. So therefore, a process of evolution in the historical development of the knowledge of vaccines has taken place. Our current knowledge of vaccines has come from an evolutionary historical process. For example, in the 1960s, it was thought that the immune system responded more strongly to the strain of the virus first encountered rather than later strains included in subsequent research. However, subsequent research shows that whilst the immune system does indeed exhibit a preference for responding to antigens it has encountered before, this does not necessarily hinder its ability to respond to new strains. And as such, we can see that our current knowledge of vaccines is shaped by an evolutionary process in its historical development. This process is one in which functional and effective knowledge is retained for further development, whilst ineffective knowledge is discarded, and therefore it doesn't contribute to the next iteration of knowledge development. The intended and actual function of knowledge can shape its historical development in terms of an evolutionary process working towards ever more adaptive knowledge. And that's about 300 words for object 1. Moving on to object 2, my second object is Newton's first edition of his 1687 book, Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Now, there are only 4 copies of this first edition, and this one contains Newton's handwritten notes in the margin, and it's held in the archives of the University of Sydney. The link between this object and the historical development of knowledge is that the Philosophia Principia Mathematica shows that the historical development of knowledge can sometimes be revolutionary. This object demonstrates that the historical development of some knowledge can be a fundamental and significant change from the knowledge that has previously developed in that field, discipline, or AOK. This fundamental and significant change I'm characterizing as revolutionary historical development. Before Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, much of the reasoning in physics was qualitative and observational. As such, the knowledge of physics was generally more hypothetical and predicated upon the subjectivities of the observer. Now, Newton's use of calculus in Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica allowed for precise calculations of forces, objects, and motions, shifting the methodology of science towards quantitative predictions. And this work laid the groundwork for classical mechanics, marking a pivotal shift in the approach to scientific inquiry and mathematical application to the real world. As such, this object represents a dramatic and fundamental change in how knowledge is produced and interpreted in physics. And as such, this object represents a revolution in the historical development of knowledge of physics. Revolutionary change in the historical development of knowledge appears to involve the discardment of much existing knowledge, principles, and methods. However, Newton famously said that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think that what he meant by that is that whilst the new knowledge framework may appear very different from the pre-revolutionary framework, there is still an interrelationship between the two, which characterizes the historical development of knowledge. The new knowledge may not have been possible without the pre-revolutionary framework, and some elements of the antecedent knowledge may still be present in the new knowledge. And this object demonstrates that the historical development of knowledge can be thought of as a mutually reciprocal process between the present and the past. Now, some of you are going to get into things like paradigm shifts there, and that's really cool stuff to talk about under this prompt. Let's go on to the third object. Now, my third object is the article From Way to Grey, 2 Decades of Genre Remixing, and it was published in the Chicago Maroon newspaper on the 21st of January 2005. The Chicago Maroon newspaper is the newspaper of the University of Chicago, a very good university. The link between this article and the prompt is that the article looks at the various ways in which the historical development of knowledge can be characterized by the synthesis of knowledge from different genres or disciplines or areas of knowledge. Now, in this case, synthesis refers to taking various elements of knowledge from different genres and combining them to form new knowledge. As such, current knowledge can be shaped by the synthesis of various elements in its historical development. The article From Way to Grey explores the synthesis of knowledge across different musical genres, focusing on the fusion of hip-hop and rock. It describes the collaborative remix of Walk This Way by Aerosmith and Run DMC as a pioneering example, breaking down genre barriers and achieving both commercial success and critical acclaim. The article highlights how the synthesis of apparently contrasting knowledge can lead to the development of effective current knowledge. It discusses a further example of the synthesis of knowledge through the Grey album, which creatively mixed Jay-Z's The Black Album with the Beatles' The White Album, representing a deeper cultural and racial blending. Now, this newspaper article, as the third object, explores the idea that current knowledge is shaped by the blending or synthesis of apparently disparate elements of knowledge in its historical development. It could be argued that all current knowledge is, to some degree, the product of synthesis in its historical development. This object specifically looks at current knowledge, that is, the product of synthesis of highly contrasting and in some ways dissimilar elements in their historical development. It could be argued that such synthesis can create highly effective and significantly different current knowledge. As such, this object demonstrates neither evolution nor revolution, but functional fusion in the production of knowledge. Okay, that's just an example of how this prompt could be approached. There are, of course, many other valid and legitimate ways to respond to this prompt. And if you want a more detailed write-up of ways to unpack this prompt, examples of knowledge arguments, and suggestions for objects that you could use, then you can pick up a copy of ToK Exhibition Prompt number 33, explained, at the link in the video description, or you can pick up a copy of the ebook All ToK Exhibition Prompts Explained, also linked in the video description. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to hit like and subscribe. I hope to see you on the next one. Stay ToKtastic, my friends.